It was one of those afternoons in Los Angeles where the sun was blazing outside, but inside the bank, the air conditioning was turned up just a little too high. The line was long, winding back and forth between the velvet ropes, and the air felt thick with impatience. People were checking their watches, tapping their feet, and staring blankly at their phones, wishing time would move faster. Everyone had somewhere else to be, and waiting in a slow-moving queue was the last thing they wanted to do with their Tuesday dot. Near the front of the line stood an elderly woman who looked like she belonged to a different, simpler time. She was small and fragile, dressed in a soft, faded cardigan with tiny flowers sewn into the fabric. In her hands she clutched a worn coin purse that looked like it had been carrying her life savings for decades. She wasn't looking at a phone. She was looking around with a gentle smile, seemingly unaware of the stressful vibes radiating from the people behind her. When the person in front of her moved away, she shuffled up to the glass counter with slow, careful steps. The teller, a young man who looked exhausted from a long shift, signaled for her to approach. The elderly woman placed her coin purse on the counter and began to open it. Her hands were trembling, a slight but constant shake that made the simple task of unzipping the purse take much longer than it should have. She offered an apologetic smile to the teller and whispered that she was there to deposit a few checks and take out a little cash for groceries. As she tried to slide her bank card into the chip reader, she missed the slot. She tried again, her fingers fumbling with the plastic card. A line of sweat formed on her upper lip. The machine beeped loudly, an error sound that echoed through the quiet bank, causing several people in the line to look up from their phones in annoyance. She flinched at the noise and tried to apologize, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, dear," she said softly to the teller. "These new machines are just so confusing to me. I'm not used to them." The teller sighed, a sound of frustration that he didn't bother to hide. He reached his hand through the glass opening and pointed aggressively at the screen. "Ma'am, you have to put the card in the other way," he said, his voice sharp. "The chip goes in facing down." The woman nodded quickly, looking terrified of making another mistake. She turned the card around and tried again, but her hands were shaking so much she dropped the card. It fell onto the counter with a soft slap. Behind her, the line began to shift uncomfortably. A man in a sharp business suit checked his watch for the third time in a minute and let out a loud, dramatic sigh. A younger woman rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, tapping her foot against the tiled floor. The tension was rising like a thermometer in the summer heat. The elderly woman could feel it. She knew she was holding everyone up. She hurriedly picked up the card and finally managed to insert it correctly, but the screen was now asking for a PIN number. She stared at the numbers, her mind going blank for a moment. The pressure of 10 pairs of eyes burning into her back was making it impossible for her to think clearly. I think I'm forgetting," she stammered, looking at the teller with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry, just give me a moment." "A moment?" "We've been here for 5 minutes," the businessman behind her muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. "Some of us actually work for a living." The comment stung and the woman's shoulders slumped forward. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was just old and living in a world that had moved too fast for her to keep up. She tried to type the numbers, hitting a wrong key in her haste. The machine beeped again, another angry error sound. "Ma'am, that was the wrong PIN," the teller said, his patience completely gone. "If you get it wrong one more time, the machine will eat your card. Do you know the number or not?" The woman's face turned a shade of pale pink. She looked at the line of people behind her. Every single face was staring at her with a mix of irritation and judgment. They didn't see a person who had lived a long life, who had maybe raised children or worked hard her whole life. They just saw an obstacle. They saw a delay in their schedule. She felt small, very small. She just wanted to deposit her checks and go home. But the technology and the unforgiving crowd were making it feel like an impossible mountain to climb. She began to dig into her coin purse again, pulling out a few crumpled checks and a handful of dollar bills. "I have cash here," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe I can just deposit this? I don't want to cause trouble." She was trying so hard to be polite and considerate, but the atmosphere in the bank had turned toxic. The sighs grew louder. Someone coughed rudely. The air of impatience had turned into open hostility. It was clear that the people behind her, and even the teller, had decided that she was nothing more than a nuisance. They just wanted her gone just as she began to count out the wrinkled dollar bills, her hands shaking so badly that one bill floated to the floor. The mood in the room shifted from annoyance to something much meaner. The manager of the bank, a man in a perfectly pressed suit who had been watching from the side, decided that enough was enough. He didn't walk over to help. He walked over to stop the problem. He stepped up behind the teller, looking down his nose at the elderly woman, and the entire room went quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. The woman looked up, terrified, clutching her money, feeling the heat of everyone's gaze, wishing she could just disappear. She had no idea that her humiliation was about to be witnessed by someone who would change everything. But for that moment, she was entirely alone in a crowd of angry strangers. The bank manager, a man wearing a suit that probably cost more than the elderly woman's monthly pension, finally decided that he had seen enough. He had been standing near the loan officer's desks, watching the line grow longer and the tension rise higher. He didn't walk over with a smile or a look of concern on his face. He marched over with a look of determination to solve a problem, and sadly, to him, the woman was the problem. He adjusted his cufflinks as he moved, the metal clicking softly, signaling his approach before he even said a word. He stepped right up to the counter, practically pushing the tired bank teller aside to take charge of the situation. "Is there an issue here?" the manager asked, though it didn't sound like a real question. His voice was loud, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. He directed his question at the teller, not the customer. Treating the woman as if she were invisible or just a piece of furniture blocking the way, the teller looked relieved to have the burden taken off his shoulders. "She can't figure out the PIN, sir. And she's trying to deposit cash, but the machine keeps timing out because she's too slow." The manager turned his sharp gaze down to the woman. She was still holding her coin purse with both hands, trying to steady her breathing. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for a little bit of kindness or, at the very least, a little bit of patience. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice cracking slightly. "I have the money right here. I just need a little more time. My hands don't work like they used to." The manager didn't even blink at her apology. He checked his watch, a heavy gold timepiece that caught the harsh fluorescent lights above them. "Ma'am, time is money and you are wasting everyone else's time. This is a place of business. We can't have the whole line stalled because you aren't prepared to use modern banking." He didn't whisper. He spoke loudly enough that the first 5 people in line could hear every word perfectly. The woman shrank back, her shoulders hunching forward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. I didn't mean to be a bother," she whispered. "I just wanted to get my grocery money for the week." "It's not just about the money," the manager snapped, his tone harsh and dismissive. "Look at this line. These people have jobs to get back to, families to take care of. You are holding up the entire queue. If you can't use the machine, you shouldn't be here during peak hours." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd behind her. It was a sound that made the woman's stomach churn. The man in the business suit, who had been sighing loudly just moments before, nodded his head in approval of the manager's words. Finally, he muttered to the person next to him, "Someone says it?" The manager, feeling empowered by the support of the crowd, decided to escalate things. He pointed a finger toward a row of hard plastic chairs against the wall, far away from the counter. "Please step aside, ma'am. Go sit over there and figure out your PIN or your card. Come back when you're ready. You cannot stand here anymore." The elderly woman felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She tried to argue, but the words got stuck in her throat. But my husband is waiting in the car," she tried to explain. "He can't walk well. I can't leave him there too long." "Not my problem," the manager said coldly. "Step aside, please. You're blocking the next customer." Panic started to set in. She knew she wasn't fast enough to pack everything up and move without making a mess, but she also knew she couldn't stay. In her frantic state, she tried to close the coin purse and pick up her checks at the same time. Her coordination, already poor due to her age, failed her completely. Her fingers slipped on the zipper of the purse, and as she tipped it forward to shove the checks inside, the bottom of the pouch gave way. A cascade of coins spilled out. It wasn't just a few pennies. It was a mix of quarters, dimes, and nickels that she had been saving. They hit the hard granite counter with a terrifying clatter and then cascaded over the edge, bouncing and rolling across the tiled floor. The noise was deafening in the quiet, tense bank. Clink, clink, clatter, roll. The sound seemed to go on forever. Time seemed to freeze for a second. The woman stared in horror at the floor, which was now littered with her money. It looked like her dignity had scattered right alongside the coins. Her face turned a deep, hot shade of red. She knew everyone was looking. She knew everyone was judging her. For a split second, there was silence. But then the reaction from the crowd wasn't sympathy. It was hostility. "Oh, for crying out loud!" A voice shouted from the back of the line. "You have got to be kidding me. Are you serious?" Another person chimed in. A young woman, maybe college age, let out a loud, sarcastic laugh. "This is like a bad joke. How incompetent do you have to be? Pick it up and move." The businessman yelled, stepping closer to her, almost invading her personal space. "You're making us late." The manager didn't scold the crowd for being rude. Instead, he glared at the woman. "Look what you've done," he said, shaking his head in disappointment. "Now we have to wait for you to clean up this mess. This is exactly why I told you to step aside." The elderly woman dropped to her knees. She didn't care about the hard floor or her aching joints. She just needed to pick up the money and disappear. Her hands were shaking violently now as she reached for a rolling quarter. She missed it, her fingers brushing against the cold tile. She tried again, grabbing a handful of coins. But her palms were sweating with nervousness, and she dropped half of them back onto the floor with a fresh jingle of metal. She felt like a small child being scolded in front of the whole class. Except this was worse. These were adults, people who should know better, treating her like she was less than human just because she was old and slow. She felt the hot tears finally spill over her cheeks, dripping down onto her hands as she scrambled to gather the coins. "I'm sorry," she sobbed quietly, her voice so broken it was barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'm just trying." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The shame was overwhelming. She just wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. The manager stood above her, towering over her small, hunched frame, tapping his foot impatiently. The people in the line were on their phones, recording the scene, or shaking their heads in disgust. The bank, a place that was supposed to be safe and secure, had turned into a nightmare. The woman felt completely alone, isolated by her age and her struggle against a world that had decided she didn't matter anymore. The humiliation was absolute, and as she knelt there on the cold floor, searching for dimes, she felt she had reached the lowest point of her life. Little did she know, however, that the atmosphere of the room was about to shift dramatically. While the elderly woman knelt on the hard, cold floor, her fingers scrambling to chase the rolling coins, the cruelty in the room seemed to reach its peak. The sound of metal clinking against the tile was drowned out by the impatient sighs and rude comments from the line. The bank manager stood over her, looking not at a human being in distress, but at an inconvenience that needed to be removed. He checked his watch again, letting out a heavy, exaggerated groan that signaled to everyone else that it was okay to be angry. "Really? This is ridiculous," the manager said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just leave it. We have a vacuum cleaner for this kind of mess. Please, go sit down. You are causing a scene." The woman didn't stop. She couldn't. Every coin on that floor was money she needed. She grabbed a dirty quarter near the heel of the manager's shiny shoe, her face wet with tears. "I can't leave it," she whimpered, her voice thick with shame. "It's mine. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The man in the business suit, who had been demanding speed just moments before, actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless laugh that sent a chill through the air. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is why we need automated everything. People are just too slow." A few other people in the line nodded in agreement, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. They were looking at their phones, scrolling through social media, completely detached from the real human suffering happening just a few feet away from them. The atmosphere was ugly. It was a display of impatience and unkindness that can sometimes happen when people get caught up in their own busy lives and forget about empathy. However, standing about 4 or 5 people back in that winding line, there was one man who was not looking at his phone. He was not checking his watch, and he was not rolling his eyes. He was watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of disgust and sadness. This man was dressed simply, wearing a faded black leather jacket over a plain shirt, worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots. He had a dark ball cap pulled low over his eyes, trying his best to blend in and look like just another regular person waiting to do his errands. He had arrived at the bank, just wanting to handle his own business quietly. But now he was witnessing something he couldn't ignore. He saw the manager's arrogance, the cruelty of the crowd, and the utter vulnerability of the old woman on the floor. His jaw tightened. He wasn't just annoyed. He was genuinely angry at the lack of basic human decency. To him, the way the woman was being treated was a disgrace. It didn't matter that he was a famous movie star. In that moment, he was just a human being watching another human being bullied. The manager, frustrated that the woman was still on the floor, raised his voice again. "Ma'am, I'm telling you for the last time. Get up and move. You are blocking the line." That was the breaking point. The man in the leather jacket had seen enough. He didn't shout or make a scene. He simply moved. He took a step out of the line, his boots making a solid thud on the floor that seemed to cut through the noise of the bank, the person standing directly behind him. A younger woman who had been busy texting looked up in surprise. She thought he was just leaving the line because he was tired of waiting. But then she looked at his face. He wasn't walking toward the door. He was walking toward the counter. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were intense and focused entirely on the woman and the manager. As he moved past the velvet ropes, a hush started to fall over the immediate area around him. The man in the business suit recognized him first. His mouth opened slightly, and he stopped tapping his foot. He looked at the man in the jacket, then back at his phone, checking a photo to confirm. His eyes went wide. He nudged the person next to him, whispering, Is that Keanu Reeves?" The whisper spread quickly. "Keanu Reeves? No way, it looks like him. Oh my God, it is him." People began to pull out their cameras, not to record the poor woman anymore, but to capture the movie star who had just stepped out of the shadows. But the man walking toward the counter didn't care about the cameras or the whispers. He moved with a calm, steady purpose that commanded respect without demanding it. He walked past the businessman, past the scoffing younger people, ignoring the open-mouthed stares. He was on a mission to stop the injustice happening right in front of him. The bank manager was still looming over the elderly woman, scolding her, so he didn't notice the shift in the room. He didn't notice that the mocking laughter had died down. He didn't notice that several people in the line were now holding their breath. The manager was too busy enjoying his own power. "Get up!" The manager barked one last time. Just then, a pair of worn leather boots stepped into the manager's field of vision. The manager stopped mid-sentence and looked up, confused. He saw the man standing there, close enough to touch. The man wasn't physically imposing in a threatening way, but his presence was powerful. He radiated a calm strength that made the manager instantly feel insecure. The man reached out a hand and placed it gently but firmly on the manager's shoulder. It wasn't a violent shove. It was a signal to stop. The room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Every single person in the bank, from the security guard to the people at the back of the line, was staring at the counter. The man in the cap spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried perfectly through the quiet room. It was deep, sincere, and filled with a quiet authority that made the manager's voice seem weak in comparison. "You need to stop right now," he said, looking the manager directly in the eyes. "Can't you see what you're doing? You're bullying her. Leave her alone." The manager blinked, stunned. He looked at the man's face, and the realization hit him. The arrogance drained out of his expression, replaced by a sudden pale shock. He froze, his mouth hanging open slightly. He was standing face to face with one of the most famous actors in the world, and that actor was looking at him with absolute disappointment. The elderly woman, still on her knees with a handful of coins, looked up, confused by the sudden silence. Through her blurry, tear-filled eyes, she saw a pair of boots, then worn jeans, and then a kind face looking down at her. She didn't recognize him as a movie star. She just saw a man who wasn't yelling. The actor didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the stunned customers. He didn't even look at the fearful manager anymore. His full attention shifted to the woman on the floor. Without hesitation, he lowered himself. He didn't care about the dirt on the floor or who was watching. He bent his knees and crouched down right beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He was telling her that she was worth his time, that she mattered, and that he wasn't too important to help her. "It's okay," he said softly, his tone gentle and reassuring. "Don't worry about them. I've got you." Think, while the elderly woman knelt on the hard, cold floor, her fingers scrambling to chase the rolling coins, the cruelty in the room seemed to reach its peak. The sound of metal clinking against the tile was drowned out by the impatient sighs and rude comments from the line. The bank manager stood over her, looking not at a human being in distress, but at an inconvenience that needed to be removed. He checked his watch again, letting out a heavy, exaggerated groan that signaled to everyone else that it was okay to be angry. "Really? This is ridiculous," the manager said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just leave it. We have a vacuum cleaner for this kind of mess. Please, go sit down. You are causing a scene." The woman didn't stop. She couldn't. Every coin on that floor was money she needed. She grabbed a dirty quarter near the heel of the manager's shiny shoe, her face wet with tears. "I can't leave it," she whimpered, her voice thick with shame. "It's mine. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The man in the business suit, who had been demanding speed just moments before, actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless laugh that sent a chill through the air. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is why we need automated everything. People are just too slow." A few other people in the line nodded in agreement, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. They were looking at their phones, scrolling through social media, completely detached from the real human suffering happening just a few feet away from them. The atmosphere was ugly. It was a display of impatience and unkindness that can sometimes happen when people get caught up in their own busy lives and forget about empathy. However, standing about 4 or 5 people back in that winding line, there was one man who was not looking at his phone. He was not checking his watch, and he was not rolling his eyes. He was watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of disgust and sadness. This man was dressed simply, wearing a faded black leather jacket over a plain shirt, worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots. He had a dark ball cap pulled low over his eyes, trying his best to blend in and look like just another regular person waiting to do his errands. He had arrived at the bank, just wanting to handle his own business quietly. But now he was witnessing something he couldn't ignore. He saw the manager's arrogance, the cruelty of the crowd, and the utter vulnerability of the old woman on the floor. His jaw tightened. He wasn't just annoyed. He was genuinely angry at the lack of basic human decency. To him, the way the woman was being treated was a disgrace. The man in the leather jacket didn't care that people were staring. He didn't care that phones were being held up to record him. In that moment, the only thing that mattered to him was the trembling woman sitting on the cold, hard floor. He reached out with a gentle hand and picked up a shiny dime that had rolled near his boot. He held it out to her, not placing it in her palm like a parent giving to a child, but offering it with respect, as if he were handing her something precious. "Here you go," he said softly. "I think this one got away from you." The woman looked at the coin, then up at his face. Her vision was still blurry from tears, but she could see the kindness in his eyes. It was a look she hadn't seen in a long time from a stranger. It wasn't the look of someone who wanted her to hurry up. It was the look of someone who saw her as a person. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm such a mess. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize," he replied immediately. His voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension that filled the room. "There's nothing to be sorry about. These machines are confusing. They change every week. I have trouble with them too." He wasn't just saying it to make her feel better. He said it with such sincerity that the woman actually believed him. For the first time since she walked into the bank, her shoulders dropped an inch. She felt a tiny bit of the weight lift off her chest. Behind them, the bank manager was still frozen. His face was pale, and he was shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. He realized now that he had made a terrible mistake. The anger he had felt just moments ago had vanished, replaced by a cold fear. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some control of the situation. Mr. Reeves, sir," he stammered. "I appreciate you trying to help, but really, we have procedures. We need to keep the line moving." "We can get a chair?" The actor didn't even turn his head to look at the manager. He kept his eyes locked on the woman. "She's not going anywhere until she's ready," he said firmly. It wasn't a shout. It was quiet, but there was a steeliness to it that made it clear he would not be argued with. "And I'm not going anywhere until she's finished. So why don't you give us a minute? Go check on something else." The manager opened his mouth to protest, but the sheer confidence in the man's voice stopped him. He looked around the room. All the customers were watching the interaction on the floor, their phones high in the air. None of them were looking at the manager for instructions anymore. They were all captivated by the scene unfolding on the floor. Realizing he was powerless, the manager took a step back. Shrinking behind the counter like a scolded schoolboy, the actor turned his attention back to the scattered coins. "Let's get the rest of these," he said cheerfully. He began to pick them up, one by one. He didn't rush. He moved deliberately, picking up a penny here, a nickel there. The woman watched him, stunned. A famous movie star, a man who probably had millions of dollars in his own bank accounts, was kneeling on a dirty floor helping her pick up loose change. It didn't seem real. As they gathered the coins, the man made a quiet joke about how fast the quarter rolled. The woman let out a small, nervous laugh. It was the first sound of happiness that had come from her all day. That simple laugh seemed to break a spell in the room. The air changed. The hostility evaporated. The people in the line who had been sneering and complaining just moments ago suddenly felt very small. They watched the man crouching on the floor, and they looked at their own expensive shoes, and they felt a deep sense of shame. They realized that while they were complaining about waiting 5 minutes, this man was showing them what true kindness looked like once all the coins were gathered. The man stood up and extended a hand to the woman. He didn't pull her up roughly. He held her hand firmly, giving her support as her old knees protested against the movement. He waited until she was steady on her feet. "Okay," he said, giving her a reassuring nod. "Let's go get this deposit done. I'll help you with the screen." They walked back to the counter together. The teller looked terrified. He didn't know whether to look at his computer or at the celebrity standing in front of him. The actor leaned in close to the woman, placing himself between her and the rest of the line, creating a protective barrier. He guided her hand toward the card reader. "All right, let's try this again," he said gently. "You were doing great before. You just need to push it in a little harder." He guided her fingers, helping her insert the card. The machine beeped, a happy sound this time. The woman beamed, looking up at him with gratitude. "I did it," she said. "You did it?" He smiled back. "See?" Nothing to it. The screen asked for the PIN. She looked at it nervously, but with him standing there, she felt calm. She typed the numbers slowly but correctly. The machine accepted it. Then she opened the deposit envelope. It was crumpled and messy. She started to apologize again, but the man just shook his head slightly. He took the envelope from her hands and placed it carefully into the machine slot for her. "You're doing wonderful," he said, while the machine whirred and processed the transaction. The man turned his gaze to the rest of the room. He didn't yell at them. He didn't scold them like the manager had scolded the woman. He just looked at them. His eyes swept over the crowd, meeting the gaze of the businessman, the college student, the people recording on their phones. It was a calm, silent challenge. He wasn't asking, "What are you looking at?" He was asking, "Is this really how we treat each other?" The room was completely silent now. The only sounds were the hum of the machine and the muffled traffic outside. No one was tapping their feet. No one was sighing. Everyone was standing still, reflecting on their own behavior. The silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they have been acting poorly and they don't know how to fix it. The actor hadn't said a word to them, but his actions had shouted louder than any lecture could. He had single-handedly stopped the bullying, comforted the victim, and forced a room full of impatient people to look in the mirror. The machine beeped again, signaling the transaction was complete. The receipt began to print. The woman looked at the actor with tears in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief, not sadness. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, squeezing his hand. "You didn't have to do this. You're a busy man." He squeezed her hand back, looking at her with total seriousness. "I'm never too busy to help someone who needs it," he said. "We have to look out for each other. Especially when things get difficult. That's what matters." The teller handed the receipt through the slot. The actor took it and checked it over for her, making sure everything was correct. He then folded it neatly and placed it gently into her coin purse. "There," he said. "All done. Now you can go get those groceries." The woman nodded, clutching her purse to her chest. She felt safe. She felt respected. And as she stood there, ready to leave, she knew she would never forget this day for as long as she lived. But the actor wasn't done yet. He noticed the manager hovering nearby, looking unsure of what to do. The actor turned to him, and in a voice that was polite but carried a firm warning, he spoke one last time to ensure the woman could leave with her head held high. With the receipt safely tucked away and the coin purse zipped tight, the actor didn't just step away. He stayed right there by her side, acting as a shield between the frail woman and the rest of the world. He turned his attention to the bank manager, who was still standing there looking pale and nervous. The manager opened his mouth, probably to offer a fake apology or make an excuse about bank policy, but the actor spoke first. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just spoke the truth plainly and clearly. "Her business is just as important as anyone else's in here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She deserves your respect, not your impatience. Next time, try helping instead of yelling. It works a lot better." The manager swallowed hard and nodded silently. He couldn't find the words to argue. He knew he was wrong, and worse, he knew that everyone else in the room knew he was wrong. The actor didn't wait for a reply. He turned back to the elderly woman and offered his arm. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here. Your husband is waiting." The woman took his arm, holding on to his leather jacket sleeve as if it were a lifeline. Together, they walked away from the counter. The path that had felt like a gauntlet of judgment earlier now felt completely different. As they walked through the maze of velvet ropes toward the glass doors, a silence fell over the bank that was heavy with meaning. The people in the line didn't look at their phones anymore. They didn't sigh or roll their eyes. They watched the two of them pass. The businessman, who had been in such a hurry just 10 minutes ago, looked down at his shoes, his face red with embarrassment. He realized how ridiculous his impatience seemed now. The younger woman who had laughed earlier put her phone away, a look of shame on her face. They all realized that, in their rush to get somewhere, they had forgotten to be human beings. The actor walked with a slow, steady pace, matching the woman's small steps. He didn't pull her forward. He let her set the speed. He leaned down slightly as they walked, listening to her whisper something about how she was going to bake cookies for her grandchildren that afternoon. He smiled and nodded, treating her story as the most important news he had heard all day. When they reached the heavy glass doors, He used his free hand to push the heavy bar, holding the door open wide. The bright afternoon sunlight spilled into the dim bank, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like a physical representation of the kindness that had just entered the room. "Is that your car right there?" he asked, pointing to an older sedan parked at the curb with an elderly man sitting in the driver's seat, looking worried. "Yes, that's him," she said, her eyes lighting up. "He gets so worried when I take too long." "Don't worry about a thing," the actor said. "I'll walk you to the door." He walked her all the way to the car. He didn't care that the sun was hot or that people on the sidewalk were stopping to stare. He opened the car door for her and waited until she was safely seated inside. The man in the driver's seat looked confused at first, wondering who this stranger in the leather jacket was, but then his face softened as he watched how gently the actor treated his wife. "You take care of her," the actor said to the husband, tapping the roof of the car lightly. "She's a wonderful lady." The husband nodded vigorously, tears welling up in his own eyes. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank you so much." "God bless you." The woman rolled down the window, reaching out to squeeze the actor's hand one last time. "You are an angel," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for seeing me." "Have a great day," he replied with a genuine warm smile. "Drive safe." He stepped back onto the sidewalk and watched as the car pulled away into traffic. He stood there for a moment, making sure they were safely gone. Then he took a deep breath, put his sunglasses back on, and turned around. He didn't march back into the bank to demand applause. He didn't look for cameras. He didn't try to turn this into a publicity stunt. Instead, he just walked back toward the bank entrance. However, he didn't get back in line. His business at the bank was done. He had accomplished something far more important than a transaction. As he walked past the glass windows of the bank, the people inside could see him. He just kept walking down the street, hands in his pockets, head down, blending back into the city. He was just a guy going about his day, leaving behind a room full of people who were profoundly changed. Inside the bank, the silence lasted for a long time after he left. The atmosphere was completely different. It wasn't cold and rushed anymore. It was quiet, reflective, and humble. The manager went back to his office, closing the door behind him, feeling smaller than he had when he put on his suit that morning. The teller looked at the next customer in line and offered a soft, polite smile instead of a bored frown. The customer, in return, didn't snap or complain. They waited patiently. The incident at the bank could have ended with a sad, humiliated old woman driving home in tears. Instead, because one person decided to step out of line and show a little bit of compassion, it ended with a lesson that everyone in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. It was a reminder that patience is free, kindness is powerful, and no matter who you are, you always have time to help someone in need. As the sun went down over the city, the story of what happened in that bank became a memory of humanity restored, proving that even in a busy, impersonal world, goodness still exists.